Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you so much for joining me here. I hope you're having a fantastic day. We're going to take a quick look, of course, at the order block data here. We got some important levels at the 120K range. We've also got an important update for you too as well by hitting the like button, commenting below. So thank you so much again for that. And obviously we want to look at the weekly time frame, some divergences here on both the dominance charts and the liquidation heat map, but more specifically, kind of a change or a shift in momentum here for altcoins. So it's not looking great. Most altcoins are paired very poorly with Bitcoin, and we're seeing a significant imbalance here. So we're going to double check that as well. Be sure to stick around. All right, folks, before we get started and jump into the backend data, I want to just kind of quickly remind you there's only 2 days left for this Bitunix team challenge here for the airdrop reward, so be sure to take advantage of that. All the information is down below. Let's take a quick look here at the trade setup here for the order blocks and basically letting us know roughly where the imbalances are. So we do have a lot more sell orders and buy orders in right now. However, there's a significant amount of buy orders down as low as 120,000. So if you see 120, 120.2, 120.5, that low area there is heavily guarded. So keep in mind, once more, we've already identified this. 120,000 was that local resistance. Now it's the local support. All right, so it's a good sign on the way down. Hypothetically, a consideration for long if we see that level. Now, just to touch on this here too, to kind of give you some perspective, this double top pattern here is very, very similar to the previous pattern that we've seen with the run from August through December, and then the retracement from January through April. So hypothetically, we got 3 more months of downtrend if this comes to fruition. Now, that's if this is the top here, of course. Not a guarantee, of course. You don't take shorts or sell your entire bag because there's a double top, but we're going to look at other comparative scenarios that kind of let us know that there may be further indication of lower price point. We can see the starting point there is essentially Bitcoin dominance increasing and ETH dominance decreasing. So ETH is poorly paired with Bitcoin. It's about a 4-to-1 ratio versus like a 3-to-1 ratio. And that's more so liquidation, but that kind of tells us that with that imbalance, there's more selling pressure and the more likelihood of that coin pulling back. Now we'll look at other coins too, of course, as well, but the summary here is that altcoin dominance is the bottom right here. We're seeing a pretty significant plateau here. Also, somewhat of a double top. I'm not big on patterns for dominance, but I do think that in general, we're coming up to that local potential resistance shelf. And just once more, based on how poorly altcoins are paired with Bitcoin right now, leads me to believe we're going to see a little bit more of a continuation lower or a sell-off for altcoins, at least one more leg down. Now, when we take a look here, of course, this is the 30-day time frame, kind of giving us indication there's more shorts starting to pile up. So the propensity for the price to drop super hard from here is lowering, right? Because we're seeing less liquidation on the downside. But if you look at the 7-day time frame, it tells us pretty obvious that 116,000 upwards of 120,000.5, that range there, that 120.5 to 116 gives us a lot of potential for further precipitation to the downside here. We do still have more longs that could get liquidated versus shorts. So we're going to look at the liquidation long versus short delta and identify if there's a difference there. Basically, what we're looking for is a bearish type of structure there to give us confirmation that we're going to continue lower. Now, this is I like to kind of show you the 2-week time frame, give you perspective, because most other charts don't show that. And we can see once more a tremendous amount of liquidation. 120.5 is that biggest area. You can see this little white line here. It's funny how perfectly the price came down like 120.6 and just turned right around after filling its fair value gap. Now, let's look here really quick just to kind of clarify. This is a liquidation heat map. Just generally speaking, I like to look at the imbalances between altcoins and Bitcoin. So we can see there's approximately a 4-to-1 ratio here for Ethereum. There's a 3-to-1 ratio, or just under like a 2.5 ratio for Bitcoin. This is basically implying that we have 2.5 more longs getting liquidated versus shorts. Now, if we compare that with traditional altcoins, or just say others, basically these are low market cap coins, they're getting hit the hardest. They're at almost like a 5-to-1 ratio. Okay. Now XRP is that's, oh my gosh, that's like a 15-to-1 ratio. XRP is getting hammered, and then of course Solana is about a 3-to-1 ratio, similar to Bitcoin. So we can see some outliers here where XRP is not doing so great. Oddly enough, BNB is just almost at break even. That coin is ridiculous. Okay, so what we're going to look at here just quickly before we jump into the back end for Bitcoin, and just touching on the ETF net inflow, we have a tremendous amount of Bitcoin ETF inflow, basically implying that there's sustainability at the current price point, which is why we're seeing altcoins drop and money flowing into stablecoin and then inevitably back into Bitcoin, right? So profits coming from altcoins going right into Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is building that support shelf. Okay, so 120, 124K, that range there is likely the new range for us before we likely leg up, or we see a quick wick down to trap late shorts at 116, 118, and then the price goes up from there. So it's kind of what we're looking at there on the back end. I want to touch on this here really quick and see if there's any divergences. As we can see, the greed index is pulling back a little bit as shorts start to pile up. And we look here as well, we can see there's more shorts than longs for the average top traders, but their margin is pretty low. So they're not trading with high margin, basically telling us that they're a little concerned with the current price action. And if we look here as well, we can see large position sizes are still very active right now. So we can see more whale traders and institutional traders being active at this price point, which increases sustainability in most cases. All right, now we take a look here at the current price point, the current open interest range on the far right-hand side. We can see the outliers are 125, 123.5, and 122.3. Okay, so those are three areas of potential resistance for us. But more importantly, I still think we're going to see 118 as a potential reality for us in the relative near future. Most likely based on the simple fact that that works like a magnet. We have shifted our liquidation delta to the downside here. And then obviously there's just a significant amount of liquidation just between 120 and 119. But more specifically, 118 to 120 has just... there's billions and billions of dollars here. Okay, so market makers know that they're going to pull the price and continue to slowly sell off. I feel we can see the open interest delta is at 36%. Generally speaking, the lower this is, the more bearish we are. Okay, it's not a good sign. And we have the inverse here for true retail long accounts. That's usually also a pretty bad sign when we have a higher delta on that. So those are not really awesome situations I like to take longs into. Now, do you just take a short at this point to the ground floor? Probably not. If you're going to short, you want to short within reason. So maybe a short now to help approximate 120,000. Right? There's hypothetical likelihood of seeing that level again. So daily time frame, let's quickly double check this here and just kind of recognize that we're seeing a stochastic divergence. Our oscillators are starting to taper off kind of sharp here. So our momentous indicators are letting us know that we've lost good momentum to the upside. Of course, that was a pretty strong push, by the way. And if you didn't catch any of my videos for the last week or two, then you'll know that we are hitting an overextended state as we have in past times when the price rips down, or an overextension to the downside, the price rips up, right? So these are pretty consistent. We're seeing 9 days of continuation in either direction. So Bitcoin has been rallying in most cases for about a week, week and a half before it pulls back or jumps back up again. So at this point, we can presume with us tentatively topping out, we have about a week's worth of continuation lower. That's kind of the concept there. Now, it's not a guarantee, of course. You don't take all trades based on that, and neither do we take a trade based on Elliott Wave or some other BS out there. But if we use it all in confluence together with other things, then you're increasing your odds of success, and that's generally what I like to teach. So when we look at the important thing I want to touch on here in the 4-hour time frame is just some quick levels. 120,000, of course, there's that support level. And we got our support range as low as 115,400. So that 115.5 approximate upwards of 120. There's a decent amount of volume in that range, kind of letting us know that we're in pretty good shape if the price were to travel back into that lower area. But once more, outside of the local highs at 117 and 120 that haven't been retested as new lows, there's not a tremendous amount of support in that area, right? We do have obviously the most amount of volume at 117.5. So my money is once again the 118 to 120K range being retested, seeing if that local high here holds as a new low. That's kind of what I'm looking for. All right. So that's generally the concept. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin? Why don't you comment below? Love to hear it. Are you bullish or bearish on the short term? I'm more so bullish on the macro, by the way. Don't get me wrong here, folks. We're still in pretty decent shape. This coin looks pretty darn awesome. So, all right, let's take a look at the next series of altcoins. All right, folks, go and take a quick look at Ethereum next here. And we're going to be using our comparative tool here, just kind of compare both coins, kind of see if there's any outliers. Because once more, we're seeing that 4-to-1 correction for liquidation versus Bitcoin. So we saw a normal correction for Bitcoin and pretty solid amount of selling pressure there for ETH. So kind of dropped off a cliff there in a lot of ways, but it is holding above its local overextension line. So let's go ahead and pay attention to that. Let's go ahead and double check first the backend data, kind of see where we're at once more. Standard stuff, folks. 4,300 is that area of interest for a long. That's just kind of in my mind where I want to consider a long position, not just because of open interest, but there's other areas of confluence there too. So we'll keep an eye on 4,300 as a potential long for ETH. You could consider shorting to that level. I do see some divergences, but we'll double check that. However, we can also recognize that our liquidation delta is now at 10 billion to the downside. This coin, on average, it ranges between 10 to 20 billion in either direction. So we saw a pretty significant push to 10 to the upside, now a push down lower. Hypothetically, with that overextension, we could see a pivot and a bounce from here, but it'd be a short-term dead cat bounce or a relief rally. So looking at the last 7 days on the left-hand side, let's double check this here and kind of see where we're at. Quickly to note, there's a lot more liquidation lower than there is above us. So last 7 days worth of liquidation, there's just some significant amount of meat left on the bone here at 4,300. You can also see somewhat of a bearish rectangle pattern here, which we can go ahead and put on the charts there for you. So let's go ahead and double check that. So let's go ahead and zoom on in. Lower time frames will be easier to see this here, but you can kind of recognize that we got this little bit of a channel here that we're working within, kind of letting us know that there's a decent chance we continue lower. These are continuation patterns in most cases, all right? So just something to kind of be mindful of. It's not an exact science, of course, but something there to kind of pay attention to. Now on the daily time frame, let's quickly note a couple of things here first. On the daily, oopsies, let's go ahead and undo that, put this down here. There we go. All right, so daily time frame. We got all moving average below the price action. Okay, so you got to recognize that this current area here of 44.50 is somewhat of a support range, or at least has that potential to be so. In other words, we saw multiple attempts to break it previously. Once it broke, of course it did, but it broke again and retested as support. So we've got a lot of consistency here at about 44.50. So that's not a reason to take a long, but it is a reason to be slightly apprehensive of taking a short into somewhat of a support level, right? So there's that. There's also that 0.618 fib level too from our local descending trend. You could argue that's the 0.382 fib level if you pull it from the lowest point to the highest point here. It's roughly the same thing, basically just reverse the fib levels there. All that said though, stochastic is pulling back as per usual. Most coins are exuding the same behavior with that overextension to the upside, that 8 or 9 on TDS. We can also see that MACD's diverging, and we got a pretty solid amount of support at 50 in the RSI. So we certainly haven't broken bearish on the daily time frame, right? So that does imply that we're still in pretty decent shape. However, if we look at this larger time frame here, we can see that we are starting to lose this ascending trend. So if you kind of look at this little trend line here, you can see that there's some consistency where the price action consistently establishes higher lows, right? We're kind of breaking that pattern here, okay? Now, it's not a guarantee, of course, but if multiple patterns continue in the same direction, then there's more likelihood of that price action to continue in that way. So at this point, we're basically testing this ascending trend line bearishly as a back test. So you kind of see the price comes up like this. That's generally how it works. A lot of times they'll trap late longs here, okay? And this could also be the early phases or stages of a head and shoulders pattern, right? So there's that potential too. Obviously, patterns are always pretty ugly in most cases, so it's never going to look perfect. But I can tell you that this does look like and feel like we're on our early stages of seeing that $4,300 continuation potential. So those are kind of my thoughts there. Everything else is pretty bearish too. We're still under 50 on the RSI and money flow index. That's a big indicator there, letting us know we're continuing lower with less money flowing in and more money flowing away. Okay, we combine that with the liquidation imbalance between Bitcoin and Ethereum. It basically implies that Ethereum will probably pull back further down lower once Bitcoin continues lower, if it does, right? Emphasis on the word if it does, because or the words there, because we don't know if Bitcoin is going to pull back, but the odds of further continuation to retest 120 to that 118K range seems very practical to me. So I'm going to lean more towards ETH retesting 4,300 as that next potential reality for us. We are starting to lose some lower time frame moving averages too. So early signs are here. What are your thoughts? Let me know. Quick heads up to my traders, make sure you take full advantage of this offer here from Bitunix. There's a significant deposit reward bonus as well as a $16,000 individual reward for just trading on the exchange. If you use my link to register in the past, you're automatically eligible. If you use my link to register now, you're eligible for all future trading bonuses and competitions. Check out the links down below for more information. All right, taking a quick look here at Solana, seeing where we're at. We've lost a lot of moving averages, definitely looking pretty worse for the wearers, if you will. Not looking fantastic. Let's go ahead and double check a few things, make sure we know kind of where we're at there. And when we look here, of course, we've talked about this previously, 236 was that pretty solid amount of resistance. 220 is a tentative support range for us based on a few confirming factors on the charts. But when we look at this liquidation delta down at 5 billion, there's more propensity for further downside. Also, of course, we can kind of see somewhat of a bearish type of rectangle pattern there too. Let's look at the last 7 days and kind of see where we're at, because I'm interested in understanding the liquidation if we have further downside. I think it was 215 if I recall. That is still the case. Yeah, so there's just a little chunk down as low as 215. So we're starting to bottom out, starting to overextend on Solana. Based on how just natural trading patterns occur, it's common for us to see a slight recovery here with a potential run up to this neckline, this local low, as a potential new top. So I would say 227, 225 is probably a better case scenario for Solana on this run up. But what we want to look at is kind of just see if there's any divergences here on the macro, because we are starting to enter that support range of both moving averages, the 20 and the 50. They're kind of hanging out right there at the 220 mark. We do have our macro support, of course, at 203. We've talked about that previously. We're barely at 50 on the RSI with money flow index higher than the RSI. Generally construed as a positive sign, but this is a 24-hour lagging indicator, right? The daily time frame, taking money flow index into consideration, you'll miss the boat in a lot of cases by looking at that. But that does imply generally strength in the larger time frames, which is good. I think the overall sentiment is that Solana should continue to progress higher overall. Between now and then, whenever that is, I think the distinct probability of further downside makes a lot more sense, because we can see all areas of confluence above the price with resistance based on the SMAs here for the lower timeframes. So if you're under one SMA, it's one thing, but if you're under all three, generally that shows us we're in that pretty significant shift in momentum. Okay, so generally speaking, that's kind of how that works. If we look at our previous time frame, we spent a lot of time underneath all moving averages here when we drop below all three. Okay, now just kind of, again, an example, never perfect, but generally speaking, that's more of a bearish divergence. When we're under 50 in the RSI, that's also such. Same thing as well with the money flow index being low and stochastic swinging up for the third time. So we got our third swing to the upside. That's generally favorable. So we could very well see a little bit of a relief recovery here. We are, of course, at an 8 on TD sequential. So we've been moving for approximately 32 hours in the same direction without continuation higher. So shorting the exact bottom right now may be a bad call if Bitcoin rallies to 123 or 124. I'm sure we're probably going to see that local resistance shelf at 227 to 230 as a potential reality for us. So hypothetically, shorting in the 227 range would seem appropriate, obviously depending on how Bitcoin behaves at that time, or considering a long in the relative near future in the 215 range based on liquidation getting hit there. There's not much left down as low as that 215 level. So just some areas of confluence that you may want to consider, but generally speaking, when you see this kind of situation here, there's more bearish than bullish signs. The propensity for further downside is higher. Okay, so hypothetically, it'd be safer to consider a short than a long at this point based on just the way the market is behaving and how poorly Solana once more is paired with Bitcoin. So those are my thoughts there. What are yours? Let me know. All right, folks, go and take a quick look here at SUI, kind of see what's going on. We're looking at what, 346, 347 at the current price point. We're kind of traveling just below that local shelf of potential support. In other words, the local low here is now the potential high for us. So 350 is a practical consideration for either a short or just in general from a bird's eye view. That's the resistance here for us being underneath that level. Once more, 360 has always been that macro point of control for us, and also open interest range. We can see that reflected here. Whoopsies. So 360, we can see that solid amount there. We have potential support at 340. Keep that in mind. Usually every 10 cents for SUI is a pretty significant level. So losing 340, could see 330 or 320. But the concept here is that liquidation delta is super high to the downside. And from a liquidation standpoint, I'm pretty sure there's liquidation below the price that's probably outweighs the upper range. And let's double check this here. Yeah, most longs that were at 340 got hit really hard recently. So we may see a slight relief rally, but the concept remains the same here. This coin is more bearish than bullish at this point, based on the simple fact that 325 and 340 are those two heavy areas of concentration and liquidation. We just saw 340 get hit pretty hard. So I would say that 325 is the next target there for the whales. So take a look here as well. There's a lot of blubber here left too remaining, by the way. I mean, look at that value there. There's a significant uptrend here with little profit taking in that range. So it's basically a fair value gap there. If we look at the daily time frame, there is still a macro bullish flag. So the concept of the macro structure remaining bullish is still present. But let's double check that and make sure. We don't just want to go once more based on patterns, because patterns mean very little without confluence. So we see a shift here in stochastic. We can see stochastic's pulling back. That's an early sign of reversal. Money flow index is higher than the RSI. RSI is at 50. That's an early indication that we're shifting momentum, but it does still show strength that money is flowing into this coin. However, once more, folks, money flow index on the larger time frames, it has to be taken with a grain of salt. And simply put, just you need to understand that it's not a super telling sign, right? So a lot of folks will use market cipher, which has that built into it, and they'll totally misunderstand a buy signal or gives you false positives because of it. So that's why I like to separate my indicators and not have them all combined in one, because then you can kind of make logical reasoning and understand that money flow index is a 14-day lag. It takes the last 14 candles. Hypothetically, we're seeing a high MFI because we saw a really strong 7-day period, but it doesn't factor in the fact that we're diverging right now. Okay, and that's where lower timeframes help. So looking at the lower timeframes, we can see that significant imbalance here. Once again, the last 14 candles, 4-hour time frame, is essentially pulling back and letting us know we have, this coin is considered to be oversold, but we're also seeing more money flowing out of it, therefore reinforcing it's not a good value to consider buying. That's kind of what it tells us. MACD is diverging, stochastic swinging up for the third time. This looks almost identical to Solana's chart. Okay, in a lot of ways, obviously different price points, but we're under all moving averages. We see that imbalance in liquidation. There's really just more propensity for further downside on this coin, just as there is with Solana. Now, do you want to short the potential bottom here? Probably not. You want to see if that the bearish back test works with this support range here. So hypothetically, the price comes up and does one of these. You're better off waiting to the 350s than you are to try a short right now. But there's no guarantee that's going to happen. However, we are pretty well overextended here in this current range. It would seem practical for the price to rally a little bit here today, especially if Bitcoin maintains its current range, now that majority of that local liquidation has been swept at 340. So those are things I kind of look for and think about. What are things that you think about and look for when you're analyzing the charts? Comment below. Let's take a look. Just before we take a look at the next altcoin, I want to recommend you consider trading with Bitunix. If you use my link to register down below or have in the past, you'll always be eligible for future trading competitions, but this one is awesome. It's probably the best one I've seen yet, with a full-on $16,000 individual prize pool, as well as a collective prize pool as well for the top 30 traders. Be sure to check out the link down below for more information. All right, folks, let's take a quick look here at XRP to round it out here. And this is a coin that has that almost, 10-15 to 1 ratio for liquidation, mainly because probably all those stupid idiot promoters talking about buying the dip at $3 and got absolutely everybody hammered. So congrats to those of you who actually watched the video and are learning from either your mistakes or just generally not trying to be an emotional idiot and following Tom, Dick, and Harry online. All of which know very little about trading. They just know that the next person thinks XRP is really cool. So they're going to jump on that boat. Either way, all bias aside here, take a look here at XRP. We want to double check the back end. 1 month's worth of data. Not much has changed here, really. This is the same narrative. 303 is effectively that current resistance range for us. That's where we shorted our XRP short position. We hit Solana 64%, all targets, and I believe we got in at 303 and we got out at 286 as a rough estimate if you achieved all targets there. So awesome stuff. Once again, congrats on that. I like to kind of bring that to your attention just so you understand, I explained thoroughly multiple times why we were considering shorting that level and why it's an important coin to not just buy in until we close soundly over that 305 range. Again, there's a lot of reasons for it, but This coin gave us some pretty false positives recently on the macro, and we're going to talk about that. Liquidation delta is at 1.6 billion. We may see a slight reversal here. I wouldn't be surprised if the price rallies back up to that $3 range, just based on the simple fact that most liquidation has been swept. The reason why we chose 286 as a profit target was because there was so much liquidation in that level that seemed very practical that that XRP was going to hit that range. So you can see 293 to about 287, heaviest pocket of liquidation there. All that was swept there fully. So a simple way to understand it is there's not a lot of late longs coming in here. So we probably see a little bit further continuation lower overall, but short-term relief rally would make sense considering all the liquidation has been fully swept there. Market makers did their job. All right. So I know it's not people like you and I doing this, right? This is Market Maker 101. And this coin is probably one of the most heavily manipulated coins in the market outside of BNB, but that's a conversation for another day, or a conversation for CZ and himself. So let's take a look here at the daily time frame and just kind of recognize here's that false breakout where the price action broke above its descending trend line. Everything looks bullish. Just kidding, it's not. We can see pretty big overextension. We only hit a 7 on TDS in this coin, but once more, that local resistance here, we failed to close above our point of control here at 303. And if you saw my videos, you'll know that the whole concept was to wait for the price to consolidate above this level and for Bitcoin to maintain its current range, because if Bitcoin pulls back, XRP will too. I mean, most coins did as well, but the concept is that XRP is always very, very synonymous in a lot of ways with Bitcoin. It moves up with Bitcoin 1-to-1, but it moves down with Bitcoin 2-to-1, or in this case, almost like a 3-to-1 ratio, right? So a significant sell-off there. So once more, waiting for the larger timeframes to give you some confirmation is a better strategy, at least if you're going to be like kind of hard and you go hard, if you will, right? But you should never go hard on this coin because it's trash. That's just an easy way to understand it. Once more, I'm not, I'm just kind of teaching to you, sorry, let me clarify. It's trash, I feel, because the community or the people that kind of trick people into buying this coin are all just kind of just dirty, terrible, not awesome people. Maybe not all of them. I don't watch any of them, honestly. I just see a bunch of stupid thumbnails in my community and just how ridiculous it is. So that's just me. But anyways, I see a lot of traders coming over to my community that have gotten burned really bad by others. So I guess that's what chaps my hide. Anyways, daily time frame. Unlike other coins, we're seeing a significant divergence under 50 on the RSI. Money flow index is pulling back with it, and really just generally seeing that MACD divergence here, at least right on the verge of it. So we're still in the earliest signs, but there's a great chance we do see a further continuation lower with a low probability, but still a probability of retracing and pulling back up to that 290, 295 range. So if we zoom in a little bit here, we can kind of see the better case scenario for XRP. If we see this once more, I'm going to look for another short. We're looking at about the local bottom here at 295. That's also where we have a ton of moving averages. I'm going to be looking for a short in 295 to 290 range. That's a hypothetical, of course. Really depends on the state of the market at that time, but that's roughly what I'm looking for, mainly because there's a ton of resistance above the price at that range, and a short-term relief rally between now and then makes sense. But I'd be careful shorting what feels like the bottom right now. Let XRP kind of get to that 290 range or higher, and then consider shorting. But you're better off honestly just waiting to take a trade with this coin in general. But if you're adding to your spot bag or considering doing so, that's a much different story than taking a high leverage play. So please understand, when I talk about it's a bad idea to buy or sell, I'm usually referring to leverage trades, not necessarily spot bags, because average into your spot bag as much as you want. You can do what feels great there, but it's not a good coin to trade right now. I'd wait for a slight recovery and then consider shorting, or if you're going to long, super tight. Don't even bother though. Longs are not a good idea in this coin right now because there's no guarantee we've actually bottomed out. Outside of liquidation, there's no incentive for the price to go much higher. Okay. All right. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Comment below. Thanks again for being an amazing part of my life. Look forward to seeing the next one. Take care.